Good evening and welcome to the Arundel Camera Club live stream for Wednesday, January 13th, 2021. My name is John Milliker and I'm the club president for the 2020-2021 season. The Arundel Camera Club was founded in 1957 and exists to promote the art, science, and education in all aspects in the fields of photography. Normally we meet at 7 p.m. every Wednesday evening during the school year in Severna Park, Maryland. However, with the current disruptions, we've decided to continue business as normal in a virtual space, which allows us to protect our members and guests from the current COVID-19 situation. For more information about us, please visit www.arundelcameraclub.org. And now let's turn it over to Christine with our programs.
Good evening. Let's go over the calendar for the next few weeks first. January 13th, which is today, we have Rich Isaacman talking to us around the world with street photography. Next week, on January 20th, we have our digital color and monochrome photography contest. The theme is open. On January 27th, which is also the deadline for our January photo assignment, which is resolutions, we have Howard Clark with Getting from Good to Great. On February 3rd, we have our talk about our photo assignment. On February 10th, we have Irene Sasalato, thank you.
He's coming to talk to our club too.
With a passion for wildlife photography. So tonight we have Rich Isaacman talking with us with Around the World with Street Photography. Rich has traveled extensively, and so his photography is closely linked to his travels. He has been to over 50 countries. He has been very interested in it since the 1970s and has had a lot of opportunities to exercise his interest by virtue of having lived in both the Netherlands in the 70s and Hawaii in the 80s, both exceptionally photogenic places. He got serious about it in 2011 when attending a family wedding in Bangladesh. I can't talk tonight, sorry. Probably the single most colorful event he has ever witnessed. Knowing that it would be that way, he purchased his first professional grade lenses for the occasion. Since then, he has been various presidents and vice presidents of the Digital Photography Club of Annapolis for the past 4 years, and he is currently the president. He is a member of the Maryland Federation of Arts and the Annapolis Arts Alliance. His photos have won a couple of awards, an honorable mention in 2019 Washington Post's Travel Photography Contest, and at any given moment, he usually has something hanging in a few venues around the area. He usually appears in about a dozen shows a year around the area, and a year ago he had his first solo gallery exhibit, a show of 29 of his drone images displayed for 2 months in the Martino Gallery of Maryland Hall. So let's turn the program over to Rich.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Christine and John. So as you heard, I've done a lot of traveling, and sort of inadvertently, street photography became a very important part of that. And so tonight, what I would like to do is take us around, talk about some of the history of street photography and what it really is. And let's see, hold on, excuse me while I figure out what I'm doing. And talk about what it is, how to do it, and so forth. Can you see my screen, Christine?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I should be full screen here. All right, so this is me, and January 13th is today. So let's get started. So first of all, what is street photography? Street photography is intended to convey a sense of place. It has to carry emotion in it. It's very, very different in many ways from more formal portraiture, in that if you go to a studio or you're having wedding photographs done, you know, there's lights and you're posed and so on and so forth. Whereas in street photography, you're using existing light, you know, whatever the environment is at hand. And of course, your camera is in most cases going to be handheld, because if you're setting up a tripod on the street, you lose an awful lot of spontaneity, obviously. So one way to think of street photography, whether it's just around in your neighborhood or whether it's in some exotic place like Bangladesh, is spontaneous portraiture. It's portraiture intended to capture a moment, to capture a sense of place, and making use of whatever subjects, whatever light, whatever environment you have available. So for the next hour or so, I want to give you a little bit of history of street photography, talk a little bit about technical issues. If you're interested in doing it yourself, I often get asked what kind of settings to use, and so I'll spend very few minutes on that. And the psychology and sociology of street photography. Far and away, the questions I get asked the most are, do you ask permission to take somebody's picture? Do you pay them? And those are very important questions, whether to ask permission, whether to pay or not to pay. And it turns out the answer is it depends. There is no hard and fast rule. It depends a lot on what the sort of emotional landscape is. It also depends on where you are. And I'll give you some examples of that shortly. So let's go back into history and talk about how street photography started. Well, it turns out that one of the first photographs that's ever been made was what you could reasonably call a street photograph. This is the oldest known, well, it may not be the oldest picture, but it's the oldest one that we still have the original of. It was taken in France, in Paris, I believe, by Joseph Niepce, about 190 years ago, approximately. So quite a long time, almost 200 years ago. And when you look at it at first glance, it just looks like a sheet of metal, which it is. But if you look more carefully, Christine, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, good. So if you take a second look, you can see the line of a roof here. This is a building. Here's another rooftop here, and there's another building across the street with its rooftop here. So you can see you're actually looking out a window onto a neighborhood. What is this thing? What is it made out of? Well, it is a sheet of pewter. And it was learned around that time that if you covered a sheet of metal with coal tar, that it was this, like sort of asphalty stuff, that it was light sensitive, and you could develop it using lavender oil. So the chemistry of photography in those days was rather different than it is today. So here we have the first street photograph made out of pewter, coal tar, and lavender oil, which sounds like some kind of strange home remedy. It soon developed into its own discipline. And in fact, this French photographer, Edouard Negre, was one of the first photographers to really devote himself to capturing the sense of Paris by photographing people going about their daily lives. And this is one of his better known ones. It's quite old. It's 170 years old almost. And it is a picture of chimney sweeps walking along the Seine River. Yeah, it's a pretty good picture considering it was one of the first photos ever made. So to continue on in history, so that was from the 1870s. And I'm going to hop, skip, and jump forward by decades at a time, and we get what could reasonably be called the classical era of street photography in the 1930s and 40s. The reason I call it that is because the most influential street photographers, or photographers who did street photography in that era, kind of set the tone and kind of thematic underpinnings of street photography that echo through this day, as you will see. And certainly, arguably, at least, the greatest giant of street photography in that era was Henri Cartier-Bresson, which is a name that if you're really into photography, you have almost certainly heard. And he was a Frenchman who worked in France primarily, but also around the world in the 30s and 40s. And on the left, you see a little boy in Paris. That is actually a very famous picture, looking very self-satisfied as he carries 2 bottles of wine, almost as big as he is. And on the right, a scene from Beijing during a very heavily polluted day, which is something that has characterized Beijing to this day, so for the last century, and a rather ominous-looking man wearing a face mask, which, of course, is also a sight that's far too familiar today. I'd ask you to pay close attention to these 2 pictures because you will see echoes of them even as we move forward into the present. So basically, Cartier-Bresson was so influential that the style of street photography that he pioneered has a very strong, had and still has a very strong influence for nearly a century afterwards. When we get to the 1950s, I told you I was going to hop, skip, and jump. The name that immediately comes to my mind for 1950s street photography is Mary Poppins, but not this Mary Poppins. The Mary Poppins I have in mind is not at all like this Mary Poppins. She's actually a lot more like this Mary Poppins. Only her name is not Mary Poppins. Now, let me explain what I mean here. You may think that this Mary Poppins and this Mary Poppins, which is the original book, are the same Mary Poppins, but they're not. If you're, well, I guess it doesn't matter what age you are anymore. You have probably seen the Disney movie of Mary Poppins with Julie Andrews as Mary Poppins, and she was relentlessly cheerful and sweetness and light, and occasionally a little bit stern with the children. But there were always figurative animated sparrows and bluebirds flying around her. However, the character in the Disney movie is very different from the character in the book. And in fact, there have been movies about that. I think, I forget the name of the movie. Do you remember, Christine? Saving Mr. Banks, I think.
Yes, that sounds right.
Yeah, because the author of the Mary Poppins book, P.L. Travers, was appalled at what became of her Mary Poppins character. Because the Mary Poppins character in the book, trust me, I am going somewhere with this discussion. The Mary Poppins character in the book was a very stern, enigmatic, humorless character, a difficult person even, not at all like Julie Andrews at her animated Bluebird finest. So this Mary Poppins, the original Mary Poppins, was a somewhat, and rather more than somewhat, considerably darker character than what you may think. Which brings me to the person I actually have in mind, Vivian Maier. Vivian Maier is one of the great street photographers, and you may never have heard of her. She's a very enigmatic character, and I mean enigmatic. There's very little known about her. She was born in 1926 in New York City to a French mother and an American father. She spent a significant part of her childhood in France, moving back and forth between France and the US, and identified very strongly with this French side of herself. In fact, after she returned permanently to the US, which was when she was 30 years old, in 1956, she moved to Chicago. Nobody knew sort of where she had come from, and she spoke with a French accent, which was fake. And she spent the entire rest of her life, and she lived until 2009, which means she lived to the age of 83. But from the age of 30 onwards, she always spoke with a fake French accent. And she did not make a career as a photographer. In fact, no one even knew that she was a photographer. She was a nanny. She spent her entire career as a nanny, and she was a rather intimidating nanny because she always dressed very somberly. She had no sense of humor, and she would drag her underage charges around the city of Chicago to unusual locations where she could take pictures, such as the Chicago stockyards, which I'm sure is exactly where you would want to take your children or grandchildren on an outing. But that's where she took her charges as a nanny so she could take pictures, street pictures, of the Chicago stockyards. No one knew that she had this passion for photography, except presumably the children that she was shepherding around. Around the time that she died, well, actually about 2 years before she died, she was discovered by a documentarian who saw some of her pictures somewhere, I don't recall where, posted them on Flickr, and Vivian Maier's street photography went viral. And then she died. And that would have been the end of it, except that this self-same person, having become interested in her, discovered that she had owned a storage locker. And so because she was dead and no longer keeping up the payments on the storage locker, he bid on the contents, which went up for auction, which turned out to be 100,000 pictures, mostly undeveloped. And so he developed them. And it turned out that, to everyone's great surprise, she was an absolutely world-class and ultimately highly influential street photographer. So, to compare, Mary Poppins versus Vivian Maier. They both wore somber clothing. They were both humorless, enigmatic loners. She did not have a personal life at all, as nearly as anyone could tell. They both had mysterious past. Nobody knew where Mary Poppins came from, and no one was real sure about Vivian Maier either. They both spoke with an accent, British in Mary Poppins' case, and pseudo-French in Vivian Mayer's. They both worked as nannies. They both took their children to strange and unexpected places. However, they did not both fly with a magic umbrella, nor did both of them take pictures. And neither of them sang Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. That was only the Julie Andrews Mary Poppins. So you can see now, when I think of street photography, I think of Vivian Mayer, and so I think of Mary Poppins. And that probably tells you more about me than I would prefer you to know. But in any case, here are a couple of Vivian Mayer's pictures. This one in Chicago. And at a glance, you can see the similarity in sort of texture and composition to Cartier-Bresson's. This one taken in Paris. And now I would ask you to cast your memory back about 5 minutes to that picture of that smiling little boy carrying the 2 giant wine bottles. And the similarity between that picture and this picture is immediately obvious. It's not at all clear that Vivian Mayer even knew who Henri Cartier-Bresson was. And yet she took pictures that look an awful lot like his. Quite remarkable. As we move into the present, you can continue to see Cartier-Bresson's influence echoing down through the decades. One of the better known modern street photographers, and by modern I mean contemporary today, 2000s, is Daido Moriyama. And he takes a somewhat more sort of confrontational approach to the viewer. You can see that he's captured a sense of motion here, and he's using what's called the Dutch tilt. Everything's sort of at a cockamamie angle, and it gives this sense of chaos and motion to create a very vivid sense of the activity in this particular street scene. So that's my 5-minute tour of the history of street photography. You will note that all of the pictures I showed you so far are black and white. I actually shoot mostly in color, as do many other modern street photographers. But yet this sense of wanting to try and convey motion or emotion, and as I said before, the sense of a place is the common thread that binds all of these pictures. So what do you set your camera to if you're out on the street in some faraway place, or even not so far away place, and you want to be prepared? Because if you're really going to do the best job, you really want to move away from the full auto settings. A lot of people, a lot of non-professional photographers, they might buy a nice camera, but they're intimidated by it because there's all sorts of knobs and buttons and things. But there's this wonderful little thing that says auto, or it has a little green square or something like that. And you set the camera to that, and it'll do all the work for you. And a very large fraction of the time, that works really, really well. But if you want to do your best, if you really want to get the best, most evocative pictures, you want to train yourself to move away from that. So let me give you some ideas for some settings that are not auto settings, full auto settings, that can get you really good results if you're interested in street photography. So one possibility, if you want to be ready for anything, as long as you're in daylight, set your camera in manual mode, set your shutter to 125th of a second, aperture at f4, and you can set the auto ISO. You can always, cameras are reasonably low noise these days, and that'll do a good job. 125th of a second will generally freeze casual motion. F4 lets enough light in without making too shallow a depth of field. And it's a good sort of general purpose, like I said, ready for anything kind of thing. Another possibility, also for general purpose street photography, is to use aperture priority. Set your aperture to 5.6, set your ISO down low enough so that the noise is nice and low, and that'll work a pretty large fraction of the time, a very large fraction of the time, actually. F5.6 is likely to be close to your lens's sweet spot in order to get maximum sharpness. And since you're on aperture priority, the camera will decide what shutter setting to use. And again, this will do a really good job most of the time. In fact, these are the settings that I use most frequently. This middle bullet, general purpose, for when I'm out on the street on my travels. But if you think you want to capture a moving target, such as children running around on the street, then you need to guarantee yourself that fast shutter speed. And so if you're trying to catch a moving target, move to shutter priority, which on your camera dial will generally be either an S or a TV. Set your shutter speed to a 200th of a second, which will capture walking and slow running kind of motion. Set your ISO up to 400. That's still going to be pretty low noise, and the aperture will be enough to get you what you want. So these are the choices of settings that I kind of have in mind when I'm walking around looking for something to photograph when I'm traveling. Composition. Now, I'm sure that many of you, and possibly everyone who's listening, knows some of the basic rules of composition, and those apply to street photography about as well as they do to landscape or any kind of general purpose photography. You know about the rule of thirds, I expect. You imagine that your frame has a tic-tac-toe board in it, and you generally, depending on the circumstances, are going to shoot to place your subjects along these lines or at the intersections of the lines. And of course, rules are made to be broken, so you don't always want to do that, but it's a good starting point. Another compositional rule, very common and also an important one, I think, is the use of leading lines. You'd like to have some compositional elements in your picture that guide the viewer's eyes into the picture. But if you're doing street portraiture, street photography, then one of the things that's most important is the eyes. Focus on your subject's eyes. That is the closest thing to an unbreakable rule for any kind of portrait photography that you're ever going to come to. Try and get the focus point to be on the eyes, and a lot of other stuff will take care of itself. And as a kind of a corollary to that, I would say look for catch light. Now, since your subjects are spontaneous, you often can't position yourself in a way that gives you those catch lights, those little reflections in the irises. But if you can, it definitely adds to the power of the image. So those are some very simple compositional rules that I bear in mind, again, when I'm walking around taking pictures in some very strange place. And I mentioned the psychology and sociology of street photography. And one of the things you'll learn as you travel around the world is that the willingness of people to have their picture taken varies dramatically from place to place, from country to country. For example, in Southern Africa, I've been to 4 or 5 countries in Southern Africa, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe. People there are very open. They like having their picture taken, and it's really easy. So you can ask permission or not, and it's kind of all good. When you get up to Northern Africa, when you get to the Arabic countries, you can find yourself in a very hostile environment. I took a lot of pictures in Morocco. You'll see some of them, and some of the people were very friendly, and a lot of them were not. There were times when I got yelled at simply for walking down the street holding my camera, not even taking a picture of anybody. People are very antsy and very unhappy about it in a lot of the Arab countries. Generally, if circumstances allow, I will ask permission. If I can get away with a candid shot, because it serves some particular purpose in the image I'm trying to convey, I will do that, but I tend to err on the safe side, particularly if there are children. If there are children around and there's an adult with the children, I do not take pictures of children without first checking with the adult with them. You can get in a whole lot of trouble if you take pictures of children and their parents think that you're doing something nefarious. So the moral of the story is here, it's situational. Willingness is highly variable. It depends on where you are, but you generally can't go wrong by asking permission. The worst thing that happens is they yell at you. Well, probably the worst thing that happens might be worse than that, but as a practical matter, the worst thing that happens is they say no and might be hostile. And the other thing that I mentioned is that people ask about is about payment. Do you pay the people that you're taking pictures of? And again, it depends on where you are, and it depends on the circumstances of who you're shooting. If there's a street performer, you got to pay, right? They're out there making their living that way, and you're getting something from them by taking their picture and listening to their music or whatever, so you pay. If you're taking a picture of an indigent person, a beggar, then clearly you pay. A merchant, someone in a store, if they're trying to make a living and they're selling their fruit and you want to take a picture of their fruit, then you offer to pay. And depending on where you are, they'll either accept payment or not. If you're shooting someone who's just in clearly very, very dire straits, I err on the side of giving them some money. For me, street photography is a very important element of my travel. My wife and I travel a lot. At latest count, we've been to 53 countries. And I try and make street photography part of what I do because I'm not a big souvenir person. So those are the things that I bring back, the memories that are evoked by looking at my own photos. So what I'd like to do in the next, 40, 50 minutes is take you on a tour of the world. We'll go through 6 continents in that time, and I'll show you some of my street photographs from each of those places. We'll start in Europe. We'll go to Turkey, and then we'll work our way down from Northern Africa to Sub-Saharan Africa, over to South Asia, Asia and Southeast Asia, down to Australia, over to Polynesia, and up and down South America, back into the US, and then right back home again. So it's quite a lot of travel that, of course, has taken place over many years and many thousands of pictures. And so I'd like to show you a few dozen of them here. So let's start in Europe. In particular, let's start in Paris, which is my personal favorite city in the world. My wife and I go to Paris every few years if we can, if time and money allow, because it's a most wonderful place. And it's a great place to do street photography because it's such a colorful city. And here we see a very non-typical street musician. Everybody sees street trumpeters and street saxophonists and occasional street violinists, but you don't see too many street piano players. But here's one in Paris, and here is a lady who is apparently enjoying it very much. And so she's giving him some money. And in fact, I'm quite certain she's enjoying it much because that is my mother, whom we brought to Paris as a gift. And just a few blocks from that scene, I took this shot right in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral, which is so tragically burned a few years ago. This taken before it caught fire, of course. And this was a schoolboy out on some kind of school assignment, sitting in front of Notre Dame, writing some kind of essay about it and drawing a picture. And I was quite taken by it. He didn't know I was there, and I took this over his shoulder. There was lots of crowds around. But you can see he's writing in the upper left here. It says Notre Dame de Santé, and underneath you can't read it, but it says the Ile de la Cité, which is where it's located. And he's saying what neighborhood it's in, 1st and 4th arrondissement, and it says Nous sommes à Notre Dame. We are at Notre Dame, and you can see the word Gothic, and you can see he's even sketched it here. Quite beautiful handwriting. I was very taken by his handwriting and his drawing, and so I took this over his shoulder. And that's as much as I'm giving you of Paris. So we are moving on to Italy. Lucca, Italy is a medieval walled city, very beautiful. And it was a rainy day when we were there. And so I took this shot of a woman with her grocery bag bicycling down this rainy street. And let me put in a word about editing here, because you'll see this technique in a number of my pictures where I'll selectively desaturate or defocus parts of the image in order to emphasize some other part, which is something you're allowed to do because that's why we have photo editing software. And in this case, it was kind of a dreary day, and so I desaturated it except for the colors on the motorcycles and on her bright yellow shopping bag in order to draw the eye right to it. And of course, here's the compositional element that I mentioned before, the leading lines of the street, kind of drawing your eye over to the woman on the right. And moreover, she's very roughly positioned along the 1/3 line. It's probably more like 1/4 in this case. So this is an image that has a lot of very basic compositional elements in order to draw your eye and help create the scene. This woman is one of the scariest human beings I have ever seen in my life. This is one of the cases where I was way too cowardly to ask permission. We were in a cafe in Padua, Italy. She was sitting probably 8 or 9 feet from us. She looks like she's waiting for her meth dealer to show up. I have no idea what her backstory is, but I was quite struck by how stark she was. I mean, there's a story there, and I'm not sure what the story is, but it's hard not to suspect that it's not a good story. And notice also the ash on her cigarette, which is just about to fall off. And I caught her surreptitiously as she was looking off to the side, apparently waiting for someone, but who knows? I mentioned before how if you take a picture of a beggar, then you should give some money. And this woman is in Santorini, on the island of Santorini, Greece, one of the Cyclades in the islands off of Greece. She is a widow, which is why she is all dressed in black. She will be dressed in black for the rest of her life, as is the custom. And she was apparently very ashamed of her situation and her condition. And so she was sitting in a corner at the top of a staircase in a public place, hunched over with her hood so you could not see her face, just with her palm held out to hope that people would put coins in it, which I did. And I never did see her face. And I felt that the emotion of the scene really did not want any color. And so I shot this in black and white, or I processed it in black and white. Similarly, this is a scene near Olympia, Greece, the site of the first Olympics. And it was actually, it was another rainy day, and it was a very cheerful cafe. And we had gone in at the suggestion of our driver guide, who said, this place has the best baklava. And so we got in out of the rain, and we went in, and there were it was the owner and 2 or 3 customers or friends there, and they were having a grand old time, and they were quite cheery. And the whole atmosphere was actually quite cheerful, except in this corner where there was this old man who just struck me as being very lonely, staring out the window at the rainy day with his cigarette in the ashtray and the smoke curling off it. And so I took this shot. I'm actually quite proud of this. This shot actually won an award. And was on, it kind of went on travel around some of the galleries around the area, and it hung at BWI for a couple of months. Istanbul, the spice market, very, very colorful. Turkey itself is very, very colorful. And this young woman was very cheerful and coy, and I was very taken by the colors of all the spices and wanted to capture that sense. So I let the colors be a little saturated. You will notice that the labels and the signage are all in English rather than Turkish. That is because it's a very popular tourist destination, of course. A religious man in Rabat, Morocco, the capital of Morocco. He seemed very calm and serene, and I wanted to capture that. I did ask him for permission. I gave him a small amount of money. He seemed quite happy with that. And I took this shot. I deliberately positioned him over to one side. Again, that rule of thirds, if you had drawn an imaginary line right there, that's where he's sitting. If I had positioned him in the center, it would have been a much less interesting picture. Plus, I would have gotten much less of this beautiful pattern on the door. Also in Rabat, kind of a crapshoot on this one because it was a dark street scene and I was shooting without a tripod. I just held it as best I could. It's not completely sharp, but it does give a sense of some street vendors. This is in an area where there was a lot of foot traffic, both local and foreign tourists. And so they were selling various trinkets, and it seemed very evocative to me, hence the shot. Also in Morocco, Tetuan, the woman that you're seeing from behind in silhouette with a floppy hat is my wife. For reasons that we've never actually discussed after all the years we've been married, she always wears these big floppy garden hats. So whenever we get separated in a crowd, I don't look for her, I look for the hat. And Morocco is full of alleyways and byways and little dark marketplaces, and this was one of them. Very, very challenging to shoot well because the outside sunlight, this being the Sahara Desert, is extremely bright, very, very intense. And the alleyways are very, very dark. So you have this enormous dynamic range, and it's hard to set the metering properly, and you end up having to do some post-processing in order to capture the details. But I was pretty happy with how it came out. Also, that same city, Tetuan in northern Morocco, I love this shot because there's some kind of story that I don't know. This is a cobbler working out on the street. This is his workplace. He not only repairs shoes, but he also brokers real estate, which is what this billboard is that you can see the corner of it in the upper right. And he also sells jewelry, which is what this little display case is over on the left. So he's sitting out there repairing shoes, and I guess this is one of his customers, judging by the fact that the shoes she is wearing are very similar to the one that he is repairing. But I just don't know. But I love the scene because of the expression on her face and the bright orange kaftan that she's wearing and the concentration of him in the suit. And I've got this fantasy that she's his mother. And she's sitting there grouching at him saying, I wanted you to be a doctor, but look, you're a cobbler out on the street. This woman is not a dentist. She is, in fact, a produce vendor with a little stall out on the street, again, in the same town in northern Morocco. And I asked her if I could take her picture. She seemed very cheerful. And we had a translator with us, so I had to work through the translator. And so I asked him to ask her if I could take her picture. And she smiled and said, well, you can take my picture, but you have to buy this squash that I'm selling. And she pointed to this squash that was the size of a large beach ball that probably weighed 30 pounds. And I was equipped with a backpack. And we went back and forth. I said, no, I'm not going to buy the squash. You have to buy the squash. I'm not going to buy the squash. You have to buy the squash. So I took her picture anyway, where we were having this mock argument, and she was laughing because it was such a ridiculous argument. And I was very happy with the picture. And I did give her some money, but I didn't take the squash with me. Also in the same town, I didn't realize how many good ones I had from Tetuan. Another street vendor selling school supplies, and there's a lot of activity going on here. And to me, it looks like he's kind of ogling this pretty woman on the left, and that may or may not be true, but I like the liveliness of the scene. There's a conversation going on here. There's kind of two subjects to the picture, one being the two women and one being him, which is normally not a good idea, but I think it works in this one. A farm woman in central Morocco clearly has had a very hard life. You can see it in not only the expressions, but the lines on her face. An alley in Morocco, those are leather hides on the backs of the donkeys that are being led through the alleyway to the nearby tannery. We also went to the tannery. And let me tell you, if you ever get an invitation to go to a tannery, you want to plug up your nose first. It was the single most appalling thing I have ever smelled in my life. They took us up to a nearby rooftop so that we weren't too close, and they gave us each a sprig of spearmint to stuff into our nostrils so that we would not vomit from the smell. Travel is a very broadening experience. So this was taken about a block away from there. Sometimes pictures happen to you. I was actually intending to take a picture just of the alleyway because I like the various shades of white and ochre and the earth tones and the geometry of it and the dark door and it's all shades of white and brown, and I like that a lot. And there wasn't anyone there, and I was just taking a picture of the alley, not realizing that I was under surveillance by this little boy at the end, and with superhuman timing. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. But 1/10 of a second before I clicked the shutter, he jumped into the alleyway and gave me a big grin. And my brain had already sent the command to my finger. And so I clicked the shutter and I got this picture, and I love it. So sometimes spontaneity is your best friend, or accident, I should say. A fish vendor in the famous city of Marrakesh noticed the shark's head on the lower right. Also in Marrakesh, in an alleyway, a man on a bicycle. I wanted to capture the motion. This took a lot of tries. It took me 10 or 12 tries to pan the camera while I was shooting. It's about 1/10 of a second exposure. And I have to, move the camera in parallel with the bike while I'm pressing the shutter in order to freeze him and blur the background. And it took me a dozen tries, and I got a lot of dirty looks from passing bicyclists. But this guy didn't notice me, and I'm quite happy with how it came out. This one hung at BWI for a while. Notice you cannot see the spokes because the wheels are turning. His feet are blurred, but his face and body are reasonably sharp. And this young man is repairing a piece of leather because this is a leather store in the souk, the marketplace in Marrakesh. Now, if I really wanted to make it a better picture, I would crop it to get rid of this black blob on the lower right. And I don't do that. And of course, he's also centered. So if I cropped it like that, in some ways it would be artistically a better picture. But this one has some significance to me personally, and so I leave it the way it is because this is my backpack on the right. And it broke. My shoulder strap broke while we were walking through the market. And so I was looking around for some place to buy a new backpack when one of our traveling companions, who was much smarter than I am, said, "Idiot, there's leather stores here everywhere. Go find a place to repair it." And sure enough, there was one about 20 feet from where I was standing. I walked in, there was this young man there with two of his friends, and I asked if he could fix it, and he said he most certainly could, and he pulled up a cushion and said, sit down, and he and his friends in somewhat broken English and I had a wonderful conversation. They were asking me about baseball. They were asking me about America, and all the time he was effecting this repair on my backpack. This was taken several years ago. I still have the backpack. When the sun goes nova 4 billion years from now and everything is destroyed, the repair that he made on this shoulder strap for my backpack will still be there. He did a really good job, and I asked him, how much do you want? And he said, well, whatever you think's appropriate. Which kind of put me on the spot. I gave him $10, which was like a whole lot to him, but I had my backpack, and so I was happy, and he and his friends were very happy, and it was a good day. This was in Hwanga, Zimbabwe, a very poor country, at a school where 25% of the children had lost at least one parent to AIDS. We were not the first Westerners to visit this school. We were the first Westerners to visit this particular classroom. And we might as well have dropped in from Mars, because we were very, very alien. And we were quite the object of attention by the children. Notice this boy with the big grin over in the back here. And so I took a bunch of pictures, and then I showed them their own pictures, and everybody went crazy. And then I had to fight them all off to keep lots and lots of fingerprints off my lenses. This is also in Zimbabwe, and much, much less happy. In Victoria Falls, there are many, many street vendors, and there is one area that is designated entirely for women vendors, because that way they are safer, and they are also less aggressive in many ways than the male vendors. This woman was selling fabrics, very beautiful fabrics, of which I have many pictures that I won't be showing you tonight. But she had this supplicant look on her face because she wanted us to buy her fabrics, and I think we did buy some. And I find this a very moving picture. You can see the catch lights in her eyes reflecting the pictures, and the beseeching on her face. A community center in Namibia, the capital of Namibia. This is one where we had a location. We had a very nice time, had a very interesting alfresco meal, and it was a very popular socializing place. I did this one in black and white, and I deliberately made it grainy in order to convey a little bit of grittiness to the scene. And this was a couple in the same place. This was taken in the same venue. And I took this one with a telephoto. They did not know that I was taking it. I didn't ask permission for this one, but they seemed to be having such a good time. And this, by the way, shows you one of the advantages of using a telephoto in a situation like this, because it compresses your depth of field. The background is blurred. The foreground is blurred. See the bottle of hot sauce is blurred, but they're nice and sharp and clearly having a good time. Also in Namibia, in the town of Swakopmund, we visited a school there as well, right next to a very, very poor township area. And the children were very, very welcoming there. And I got a lot of nice shots there. And what you will see here is that I have edited the picture. I have desaturated everything in the picture except the girl. I wanted to draw the eye to her praying. And it's practically the only thing your eye goes to in the picture, which is what I was looking for. And of course, you also have your rule of thirds operating here. There's a vertical line runs through her about a third of the way into the frame. They were really good, enthusiastic kids. It was a real pleasure to interact with them. This is in Chittagong, Bangladesh, a place you will probably never go. No tourists do. But for complicated family reasons, we were there. And I'm very glad we were, because I saw a lot of things that would not see anywhere else. And we ourselves were the object of great attention, because they don't ever see Westerners there, ever. And in fact, we were at a function. We were at a wedding, in fact. People took more pictures of us than they did of the bride and groom. And a gaggle of teenage girls came up to my wife, who is blonde hair and blue-eyed, and asked her if she was a movie star, if we lived in Hollywood. But outside the wedding venue, there was a cricket game going on. And so I was snapping away wildly watching these young men play cricket. And everybody who looks at this, well, not everybody, but a lot of people who look at this picture, the first question that comes to their mind were, did he hit it? And I am sorry to say that he did not. He whiffed it, and this fellow over here in the black T-shirt caught it. You can see the concentration in everybody's face, right? His tongue is sticking out here. He's got his eye on the ball. And it's a lovely picture, I think. I took many, many pictures over a period of several minutes. And finally, they stopped, and they turned and they looked at me. They said, "So you going to take pictures, or are you going to play cricket?" And they dragged me over, and they put me on the whatever they call, whatever the equivalent of a pitcher's mound is. And they gave me the ball, and they said, "Pitch." So I did.
Quick question about the last one, Rich.
This one or this one?
This one, the young girl. Was the color with the young lady praying enhanced?
No.
And they said that it was really well done and draws attention to her.
Well, thank you very much. That in fact was my intent. So I'm glad you're telling me that I succeeded. Thank you.
They said, "Wow, what a capture."
Thank you very much. This is also in Chittagong, Bangladesh, in a back alley where we were walking from one event venue to another. And I went out kind of wandering by myself for just a minute, which may not have been the smartest thing in the world. And I encountered this group of vendors at a night market. And, I might, as I said before, I might as well have been from Mars because they'd never actually seen a Westerner before, except on television or in movie posters. And I looked at them and they all looked at me. And some people who look at this picture get a sense of hostility because it looks like the boy with the Boulder T-shirt here is waving a stick at me. And this guy over here is looking kind of intense. And it's a mistaken impression. It's a kind of a trick of the instant, I guess I would say. They were, in fact, rather bemused by me, could not for the life of them understand why somebody, A, was here from the West, and B, would want to take a picture of them. But in fact, I like this picture a lot, and I have it hanging in my house. This is a young father teaching his daughter to play an instrument in Beijing. The instrument is called a two-string Chinese violin. Its technical name is the erhu, E-R-H-U. And I thought it was a very lovely, touching scene. This young woman in Japan, this was a spur of the moment. We were walking past each other in different directions. I was quite taken by her kimono and her very severe features, and so I just whipped up my camera and shot the picture. She does not look too happy, and I don't think she was. But it certainly is a colorful shot. Again, you can see that I deliberately desaturated the background in order to draw the eye to her colors. Also in Tokyo, I liked these two kids. This was on the metro in Tokyo, and they were like, I just thought they were too cool for school, and so I grabbed this shot and monkeyed with the color to give it a more city kind of look. He's smoking a cigarette, and they're just way too cool for me. Also in Tokyo, also the advantage of a telephoto lens for compressing depth of field and for spotting things at a distance. I was probably 50 feet away from this young woman, but I spotted her immediately because she was taller than everyone around her, except for this guy over on the right. And of course, she's blonde, and everybody around her has dark hair because, like herself, everybody around her is Japanese. So I took this shot with a telephoto. I brightened her a little bit in order to make her stand out from the crowd, and I like it a lot. Yes, this is the first deer selfie that I've ever taken. This was taken in a place near Kyoto, a little town called Nara, at a big Shinto shrine called the Katsuku Taishi shrine, and there are hundreds and hundreds of deer wandering around, and so there's vendors selling little packages of feed so you can feed the deer, and they're completely brazen. And so rather than show you pictures of the shrine, I'm showing you a picture of a young woman who wanted to have a deer selfie of her own with her iPhone. This is in Hanoi. If you go to Hanoi, which is a wonderful, fascinating city, then in the oldest part of town, there's an area in which every street has a different vendor theme. And this particular street, everybody was selling hardware. There's another street where everybody's selling shoes, another street where everybody's selling clothing. And we were actually in a rickshaw going down the hardware street, and I saw this scene, and it was just this riot of aluminum stuff And so I shot it, and I especially liked that it had this splash of color here. This guy in the motorcycle helmet, you may see you can see he's in green, and his motorcycle helmet says Grab. Grab is the Vietnamese Uber Eats. He's got a motorcycle and he does food deliveries. That's how you get a pizza delivered in Hanoi. And this is the electrical system in Hanoi. And in fact, in many, many developing countries, including Bangladesh, if you go out on any street corner, this is what the wiring looks like. And it's just amazing that they do have power outages all the time because it fails, right? If somebody is setting up in a new apartment, they'll just run a cable out the window and climb up the pole and just wire themselves into the system without getting killed. And, everybody gets power failures that last a few minutes about 10 times a day. And of course, I made this black and white because it kind of wants it. Total electrical chaos. And this is what the main boulevards in Hanoi look like. Absolutely jam-packed. You can see some of the Uber Eats guys over here in the green with the motorcycle. They're all over the place. Traffic is, I won't spend the time describing to you just how completely lunatic traffic is, but about 1 minute after this picture was taken, we witnessed an accident, which I also had pictures of. And I took this picture while standing upright in a Russian Jeep that we had hired to drive us around the city. Hoi An is a craft center of Vietnam, and there's a marketplace there, and this is a good example of making lemons from lemonade. It's a covered marketplace. There's like a big tent over it. It's all fish and produce, and it's all staffed entirely by women because the men are all out doing fishing and physical labor. And I wandered over there figuring I could get some nice pictures, which I did. And no sooner did I wander under the big tent than it started to pour, a genuine tropical downpour, this being Vietnam in the tropics. And so I made lemons out of lemonade. I put on my telephoto lens and I started snapping candids of people at a distance. And I got some beautiful evocative shots that show just how hard these women are working. I left the shadows in place in order to, let you see the fatigue on her face. And I'll show you a couple other examples of that. This young woman just looks exhausted to me. And this is the second scariest human being I've ever seen, besides the woman in Padua. I think of her as the Dragon Lady. And despite the baleful look on her face, she's not actually looking at me. She doesn't know I'm taking her picture because I took it with a telephoto from fairly far away. She just happens to be looking in my direction, thinking about something that clearly she's not altogether happy about. I'm thinking that she's a grandmother and it's like her grandchildren haven't called her for 2 weeks. And, how ungrateful are they? But it's certainly a picture that makes you speculate what's going on in her head. Sydney, Australia. This is at one end of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and we were just wandering around there one night. And I saw this scene, and immediately made me think of an Edward Hopper scene. And so I had my tripod with me, and I set this up, and I took this picture of a gelato stand in Australia, which I like a lot. This one, I also have a nice print of this one hanging in my home. And now we are continuing our journey around the world. We're now in Polynesia, in the Cook Islands, of the island of Rarotonga. You may never have heard of the Cook Islands, and I certainly would not blame you if you did not. They are basically a small collection of dots in the Pacific, about a half a dozen islands, the largest of which is only about 5 or 10 miles across, and that is Rarotonga. It's the capital. The Cook Islands are located just, if you draw a line from New Zealand to Los Angeles, they're right about at the midpoint of that line. They are really in the middle of nowhere, but they're very colorful and beautiful. And we did a lot of snorkeling there and met some very lovely people, including this lady at a marketplace. And obviously, I asked her if I could take her picture. I loved the flower in her hair. And she didn't say yes or no. She just kind of looked up at me and kind of smiled knowingly. And I liked that a lot. And this gentleman, I was mainly interested in his tattoos. These kind of geometric patterns are very, very common. A very common kind of motif in tattoos in Polynesia, particularly in the Maoris in New Zealand. And this was in a marketplace. I think they were selling fabrics at this particular stall. And I noticed his tattoos. And I went up to him and I said, "I love your tattoos. Do you mind if I take a picture of them?" And he was very proud to show off his tattoos. And so rather than just sitting there, which is what he was doing when I asked him, is he stood up and he kind of puffed out his chest and flexed. And I said, "Well, that's too nice a pose to take just the tattoos." And so I took all of him, and he looks quite proud. And it's a nice, happy picture. And now we're coming back home slowly. We're in Honolulu. You have doubtless heard of and very possibly have eaten Kahlua pork. Well, this is Kahlua pork being made at a street fair in Chinatown during Chinese New Year in Honolulu a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago. This is the guy, and I liked that I could get a profile of the guy, and you can see he's working hard. I mean, there's coals and it's barbecue and it's hot and he's sweating. And we bought some Kahlua barbecue, some of his Kahlua pork, and it was great. Also in Chinatown in Honolulu, we were just wandering around, and I saw this character standing outside the door, and he just seemed like he just looked fascinating to me. I'm not even sure why. And so I asked him if I could take his picture, which turned out to be a very entertaining thing to do, because he was a total loonball. He was nuts. I mean, he was just plain crazy. He started talking in a really loud voice. He was perfectly friendly, but he was nuts. He was crazy. And he asked me if I was Clint Eastwood. And I assured him I wasn't. And he positioned himself quite fortuitously in a way that I got this nice backlit effect with the sun kind of shining around his bald head and through his ears. And it's a nice shot.
Quick question from the stream. JC asks, are all of your photos taken with a camera, or do you use your phone also?
They're all taken with my camera. When my wife and I are traveling, she prefers to use her phone, and so she'll fire off lots of spontaneous, candid stuff with her phone. But I stick to my camera. I have, in case you're interested, I have a Canon. It's not a particularly high-end camera. It's a Canon T6i, which is sort of a low to mid-range SLR. But I invested in very high-grade lenses, and that's important, because if you really want really good optics, sharp images, the lenses are much more important than the camera body. This is one of the very few that I took that don't have any people in it, but which I still consider a street photograph. Also in Chinatown in Honolulu. Chinatown there is kind of gritty, a little run down, a little dusty, but with a taste of old world China in it. And I took this shot. I also have a shot of the window, which I won't be showing you, but in the window, he's the Chinese herb specialist. There's a dried lizard sitting in the display window here, mummified lizard. And right down the street from that picture, there was this one, the Club Hubba Hubba live nude shows. You might wonder why anyone would have a sign like that, complete with the neon, girly pose there. It turns out that the building itself is quite old. It's on the order of 100 or 120 years old, has gone through a number of incarnations. And then during World War II and in the immediate World War II years, it was a nightclub. It was this kind of a girly nightclub, the Club Hubba Hubba, and then it eventually shut down, and the building fell into disrepair. And now it has, because of its age and history, it has historical building status, and so they can't take the sign down. So I took a picture of it with the more modern apartment building in the background. I desaturated the colors, and I added a lot of grain. If you were wondering why it looked grainy, that was deliberate in order to make the image look a little older and a lot grottier. I mean, you got to have a grainy picture if you got a sign that says Club Hubba Hubba Nude Shows. And this is in Kailua Kona, Hawaii. My wife and I are snowbirds. We are privileged to be able to spend about half of each winter in Hawaii. We have a place on the Big Island that we rent. And in downtown Kailua, there's a weekly street fair, and I happened to see this woman. And this elaborate tattoo on her back reads "Uamaui ke ia o kai aina I ka pono," which is the Hawaii state motto. which translates as the breath of the land moves forward in righteousness. However, and that is the state motto of Hawaii. However, it turns out that Hawaii has some complicated translations because there can be multiple meanings of some of the words. And in this case, an alternate translation is that the sovereignty of the land moves forward in righteousness. And there is a burgeoning Hawaii sovereignty movement that wants Hawaii to be an independent country because they feel that their sovereignty was stolen from them when they were basically forced to join the U.S., which, by the way, happens to be true. It seems unlikely that they will ever become independent, but there is a sovereignty movement, and it is likely that this woman is a part of it, which is why she has this tattoo across her back. There have actually been some very positive benefits of having such a movement, one being that the Hawaiian language, which had almost died out, is now being much more widely taught. And as you can see from the image, this is an example of where I desaturated the background and I deliberately positioned her off center. This one also in Kailua. I love this picture because I have no idea what's going on here. I don't know whether they're tourists or locals. This was taken the same day. It was within a few minutes of the one you just saw. And I just don't know. I like to think that the woman is going to a rave. You know, she's got her dealy bobbers on and she's probably got a glow stick in her purse. And the guy is arranging a mob hit. You know, I don't know what he's saying to the telephone, you know, but he's put his sunglasses up on his head. He's saying, you know, you got to make it look like an accident. Anyway, so I don't know what's going on, but I love this shot. And I did not ask their permission to do it. It was surreptitious. And this young man in a marketplace in Kailua, also selling fabrics, very colorful. He was a very nice guy. And I just liked his appearance. So continuing eastward, only now southeastward, we are now in Chile to a march, a protest march in Santiago, the capital. The yellow banner, as you can probably figure out, says amnesty for migrants. And the blue banner says migration is a right, not a crime. When we think of illegal immigrants, of course, we tend to think of Mexicans and Central Americans in this country. But in fact, there's an immigration problem in Chile as well, because Chile is a much richer country than Argentina. And they have a problem with illegal immigrants coming over the border from Argentina. And this is a protest march to support them. This is in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I believe that this is, I'm guessing, because I'm Jewish, but somebody can correct me, but I'm guessing that this is the girl's first communion. And so the family is all wound up about that. Also in Buenos Aires, at an indoor market, we were wandering around and this guy wasn't getting any business, and so he decided to take a nap. And I just love it. You know, he's wearing these croc-like sandals and a Mickey Mouse Santa Claus T-shirt, and he's asleep in front of his laptop. It's just kind of this is a photo that John Waters would like to take, I think. And then heading north from Chile, we're now in Central America, in Costa Rica, and these 3 schoolgirls were at the beach, and I thought it was a very lovely scene with their blue blouses and the blue ocean in the background. So I asked if I could take their picture, and they posed very nicely for me. This is in Chinandega, Nicaragua. If you do go to Nicaragua, it's unlikely you'll end up in Chinandega, although it's possible, I suppose. It's a fairly poor part of an otherwise also poor country. And my daughter-in-law was in the Peace Corps there, and we were down there visiting her. And I caught these 2 guys with a telephoto lens, and I think the guy on the right saw me looking at them, and I guess he wasn't too happy. I like this shot, both because of the emotion in his face and because of the colors, the green and the aqua. And now we have returned to the U.S. We are in Canyon de Chelly in Arizona, which if you have never visited, I strongly encourage you to do. This is a Navajo woman who was making and selling her own pottery there at the entrance to the park. I asked if I could take her picture, and she was quite happy to do that. She gave me a big closed-mouth smile. And my wife and I ended up actually buying that pot from her. We were leaving the next morning, and I said, gee, it looks like it's going to be a really nice pot, but we're leaving tomorrow morning. She said, don't worry. Tell me where your hotel is. And sure enough, at about 6 o'clock the next morning, some young man showed up at our door with this pot all finished and glazed and fired and wrapped in bubble wrap, ready for us to take home. Now, you may have thought Colonel Sanders was dead, but I'm happy to inform you that he is alive and well in Santa Fe. And so I saw this guy at a marketplace, and I thought, this is really too good. And another nice shot as well. Again, this was fate smiling upon us. My intent was actually to visit a particular church, which is known for its indoor architecture. And so my wife and I went to the church, and we couldn't get in. There were a bunch of people milling around in the courtyard, and the church doors were closed, and there was a wedding going on, and there was a mariachi band playing in the courtyard, and people milling around waiting for something to happen, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. So I figured I would take some pictures. So I took pictures of the mariachi band, and I took pictures of the outside of the church, and we waited around. I figured I would take a picture of the happy couple when they emerged from the church. And eventually the doors swung open, and out came the happy couple. And imagine my surprise to see 2 bridal gowns. And so everybody cheered, and they walked through the crowd, and they got into their little carriage here, sort of rickshaw kind of thing. And you can't see it in the picture because it's on the back, but there was a just married sign, and they gave each other a nice kiss. And I took this nice picture. And I wish I knew who they were, because I would be very happy to send them the picture. As you can see, there's another photographer also doing it. I decided to leave that in there because I thought it kind of added to the energy of the scene. Heading eastward, we're now on the East Coast. We are in Key West, Florida. I took my camera out one night. Key West is a really wild place, so a lot of bars and crazy things going on. And so I went out late one night, around 11 p.m. or so, to just see what I could see. I took my tripod with me, and I saw these happy people buying a hot dog from a happy hot dog guy. Thought it made a nice little street scene. And if you're in Key West, when sunset rolls around, you will go to Mallory Square, right at the very tip of the key, where there are many, many people drinking many, many types of alcohol and waiting for the sunset. And there's street performers, and there's all sorts of lively things going on. And you get a beautiful sunset, and everybody's drunk and happy. And it's really quite the scene. At least it will be again once, the pandemic is finished, I hope. And I caught this juggler who had set up a tightrope, silhouetted by the sun, and ran into him, I guess either later that day or the next day, because it turned out he was the husband of the bartender at our hotel. And we went into the bar to get some food, and there he was. And moving up the coast to Boston, and I realize this doesn't look like Boston, but we happened to be there visiting, and there happened to be a Latin street fair going on with people in costumes from around the Caribbean and Latin America. And got a picture of this young one. I took a lot of pictures there. And there's another one. These 2 women. Giant earrings, very colorful. And New York City, street scene. The brownstones of New York City are in and of themselves a wonderful photographic subject. The brownstones convey an emotion and a sense of place all of their own. And so I caught this one and played around with the colors a little bit to make it look a little more retro, I guess, is what I was going for. It's a mixture of elegance and decay, and I like the combination. This is a blown shot, which I decided I liked. We had just come out of a museum, I believe, and we were walking through this narrow. We were walking along this narrow sidewalk that was framed with construction scaffolding. You can see the bars here over on the left. And there was this group of schoolboys in front of us. And I wanted to get a picture of the schoolboys from behind, and I didn't have any time. I just whipped up the camera and just fired off the shutter without bothering to look at any of the settings, just figuring I'd get what I get. And this is what I got. Too slow a shutter speed, so it's all motion blurred, but I kind of like it. You may think otherwise, and I'm not going to argue with you because you could persuasively argue that it's a really lousy shot. But I kind of like it because it's got a lot of motion and life to it. And there's some interaction, the boys are talking to each other, and it kind of makes you wonder what they're saying. Also in New York City, crowd of girls. I don't know whether they were a local school group or some out-of-town tourists, but they were having a grand old time on the Lower East Side, and I caught them taking a selfie, and I think it's a nice lively shot. You will notice that this is another case in which I desaturated the background, which I think was very necessary in this case because there's a lot of people in this scene, right? There's 5 girls, but here's another 4 people in the background. Actually, it looks like 6 girls. And another 3 boys over here. And if everybody was in that scene, if everybody was part of the subject, it would be too crowded and too busy. But by desaturating the background, I was deliberately trying to focus the viewer's eye onto the young women. Also in New York, a cafe, a nice little reunion going on. And again, I wanted to give it a kind of a retro feel with the lighting and the color. And I'm pretty happy with how it came out. And now we are coming home. We're in Baltimore. This was taken a few years ago at the Baltimore Art Fest, which I expect you are all or should be familiar with. Every August, for a week, I don't know if it's a weekend maybe, they block off a couple of blocks of downtown Baltimore, and there's all sorts of art displays and activities and street performances and just all kinds of things. It's wonderfully energetic. Somehow they always manage to pick the hottest weekend of the year to do it. It's always like 105 degrees, and it's like brutal, but it's a lot of fun. And this was a dance troupe, and this woman was just so into it, just really lively, putting a lot of energy into it. And you meet another good reason to go is to get pictures like this. There's a lot of entertaining street characters just walking around, just kind of being themselves. I asked this woman if I could take her picture, and she was happy to pose. And I framed it so that deliberately, of course, so that the umbrella fills most of the frame. And God knows how she sees through those sunglasses, but she didn't seem to have any trouble doing so. And now we're home. We're back in Annapolis. This is down at the city dock. Just took a little walk around one day with my camera to see what I could see. And this little girl was there with her father. And she was interested in my camera, and she did this little acrobatic thing, bending over backwards. In fact, if you look carefully, if your screen is big enough, if you look at the reflections in her eyeballs, right in the middle there, you can see me. That's her father over on the left side of the screen. Of course, I asked his permission. And again, to keep the viewer focused on where I want it to be focused, which is on the little girl's eyes, I desaturated everything except her. And then I think this is my last picture. This is downtown Annapolis on a nice warm summer night where people are getting ice cream. I think, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Annapolis Ice Cream Company closed about 1.5 years ago, unfortunately, because it was a nice place to go and get ice cream. I set up my tripod across the street, and I just kind of waited for various breaks in the traffic. I used it was a time exposure, obviously. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think probably about a second, maybe a little less, half a second, to get the shot. You have and I stopped way down. I was like at F16 or something. So I have the State House in nice sharp focus in the background. And to me, this gives a nice sense of downtown Annapolis, day in Main Street on a nice summer night. And that brings us home. I promised you about an hour. It's been about 1 hour and 10 minutes. So thanks for your interest. And this is who I am. I've got 2 websites. This is my sales website where I have a lot of my pictures up, although not the ones you've just seen. Street photography is great. I love it. I do a lot of it, but I never sell any of it. I mostly don't even try because mostly people are not interested in buying pictures of people that they don't know. But I do exhibit them. I'll enter them in gallery shows and stuff, and they'll frequently get in. And so they're, I guess they count as art, but they're not particularly sellable. But in any case, I have a lot of landscapes. I do a lot of drone photography, and I've been to a lot of countries. So this is my website for browsing some of my collection and buying them too. I told you that my wife and I travel quite a bit. We keep a travel blog. We publish a travel blog with about 500 followers. And this is our travel blog, richandalice.wordpress.com. And it includes a lot of my photos when we're on travel. I try and process my pictures and post some of them in real time on the blog as well. So that is me, and that is who I am, and that is our little hour and 10-minute trip around the world.
Well, I'm going to put out the last call for questions, and it was really nice to travel the world with you tonight.
Thank you.
Some really nice photos there, and a mix of a little bit of everything.
Well, when you go to a lot of places, you kind of have to.
That's true. I put out a last call in chat a little while ago, and it doesn't look like I'm getting any questions. But thank you for joining us tonight. And actually, Scott Dine says some very nice work, but some of the processing overcame the subject.
Okay, fair criticism. It's a matter of taste, of course.
Anne says, I really enjoyed this program. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me, and thank you for your interest.
And if I get any more comments, I will share them. But I'm sure everyone was able to take something from this and visit his websites, learn more about him. Fred says thank you.
I've placed Rich's websites in Facebook chat. And Rich, when Christine closes out the meeting for tonight, stick around and we'll chat.
Okay.
So join us next week for our digital and monochrome photography contest. And please start working on your photo assignments for resolutions. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Good night.